Mystery Bible On watchers and listeners. You are here joining your fearless co-hosts Joel and Dan for episode 45 of the Mystery Bible On podcast. Today we have a guest and a topic that I know our audience is absolutely going to love. Our guest is Mr. Paul Stobbs, and he wrote a book with the intriguing title of The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. And I have to admit, I felt exactly what you all are thinking the first time I heard that. And I went, what? Nephilim and clowns? And then I started hearing him explain it. And I went, holy cow, this guy is onto something. And this was something that I immediately sent over to Dan and said, Dan, can you find this guy? And can we get Paul Stobbs on our recording so that we can ask him all the questions that I have and talk about other things as well? So that's what we have going on today. Paul, thanks so much for joining us here with the Mystery Bible On podcast.
No problem. Thanks for having me. And yes, I also know exactly what it sounds like. Believe me, I do. I really do.
Well, it works. As soon as you hear it, you're like, tell me more, because it's a statement I've never heard. Paul, I didn't do you justice in the first part of the intro there. You're a researcher, an artist, and you have your own YouTube channel, Understanding Conspiracy. Obviously, we'll link to all that and make sure our readers can find it. Anything else that our listeners who are about to be your readers need to know about you and how you got into this and what the context is. And then we're going to get off and running because I have many questions and I'm sure Dan does as well.
Yeah, sure. So predominantly I am a YouTuber. That's what I am known for. I have a channel called Understanding Conspiracy. I started it in 2014 as kind of an end of university project, I suppose. It's an odd one. I was studying fine art in Lincoln in the UK, and conspiracy kind of became my subject matter. It's what I made artwork about. I was enthralled into the conspiracy culture. I just couldn't get enough of hearing all these wild ideas out there in the world, describing the corruptions and the hidden hands and the occult, nasty spiritual warfare stuff going on. It all just got me hook, line, and sinker, and I was a fully fledged conspiracy theorist, trying to convince everybody else around me that it was all true too. So I used my art for my university degree at the time to try and convey that stuff. And I eventually became mainly a video maker more than anything, and a talker, I suppose. So that was my excuse anyway. I just wanted to talk about conspiracy theory, so I said, okay, well, I'll just make it about my university work to, at least get my degree at the end of all of this. So it kind of all worked out quite nicely. But by the end of the degree, I had this YouTube channel and I just kept going. And for people who, have heard me before, and this is a story I've told many times, but I come from more of a non-religious upbringing more than anything. A-religious, it wasn't a thing. It just wasn't a part of my family. My grandma was a Catholic, but I never really paid much attention to it, into my early teen years, I was a bit of a staunch anti-biblical atheistic type, like you typically are as a teenager when you don't have any other context,
What?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any other context to understand religion. Yeah. So for me, it was just what I was taught in school is what the truth is. And these stupid Christians out there believing, that evolution isn't real. Who the hell are those guys? It's kind of, you just have that kind of idea, don't you?
Right.
But obviously, growing up, I was still searching for answers. I'm a creative type, and the cold, hard, logistical, everything is empty space and nothing matters, philosophy just didn't really feel right deep down inside. I kind of always knew that. So I was always looking for God in a sense, while always trying to be one with the world and deny it as well at the same time. It's that internal struggle I think a lot of people can appreciate and understand growing up, especially in England, which is quite a lackluster in the religious front these days, shall we say. It's not, no one does Christianity quite like an American is something I like to say. Yeah, we're just not the same here in Britain. Religion's very much behind closed doors in your own time type of thing. You don't talk about it around the dinner table. It's just that kind of place. That's the culture we grew up in. But going through my teen years, I kind of end up falling into the I wouldn't say new age necessarily. I wasn't into like crystal power and chakra alignment or that kind of thing. I was still very much my logistical minded self, but I was learning about things like psychedelic experiences and people seeing other dimensions and things like this. And it got the better of me. My curiosity got the better of me. And I remember when I was like, I think I must have been 16. I was too young to be doing anything like this. But me and my friend got some salvia. A Salvia divinorum is actually quite a commonly grown garden plant, to be honest. I can buy it in my local, garden centre. Now I am a gardener. I have my own garden. I found it. And I'm like, it's this easy to get. It's right here, just around the corner from my house. But when you're a kid, you don't know these things. But they were selling it legally in head shops, we call them, which are like, they sell bongs and things like that, and they had this legal drug called salvia you could get over the counter at the time. I don't think it's like that anymore. I'm not sure.
It's only legal because it hadn't yet been made illegal, because
something like
not enough
that.
People had tried smoking it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we were watching videos online of people doing it, and they were having these wild experiences, but they're just not there anymore. And we were like, what are they seeing? And what's going on? Yeah. So at the age of 16, we did it and got these things and did them. And that was my first encounter with something oddly spiritual. And I'm not condoning, I'm not saying you need to do this to have a spiritual experience, but that knocked me off my pedestal, I would say, because it's kind of like, so all that I see surely is not all that there is. And that began a real inner journey to seek answers. And I fell into the New Age stuff, I suppose, the Gnostic way of thinking, we're all a God collectively, or we're all God collectively who has forgotten that word God, and we're all just consciousness, and we're all one. And that kind of mentality is kind of what I went down. Because again, I didn't really have a context to bridge that gap between Christianity and myself. I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand how God sending his son to die for me meant anything. It's an alien concept for my mind. It was at the time, and I know many other people in a similar upbringing and scenario. So I went down the other route, the Eastern philosophy route, and I was swimming in that for a long time. And I was still searching to get to these other realms, while swimming in those Gnostic, occultic philosophies, I suppose. And going through into my early 20s through university while I was doing this artwork stuff, Like I said, the end of the world was coming in 2012. The Mayan calendar was about to come to an end. That kind of sucked me into the conspiracy world, while also having all these ideas about Taoism and Buddhism and Gnosticism and occultism and all these type of things. So it all kind of melded to me kind of watching Zeitgeist and all those typical early documentaries that are around in that day, telling me that Jesus is nothing but a sun god, and is just a representation of many other gods that have come before him, and it's just another repeat pattern. But I believed all that crap, at the time, because I didn't know any different. I wasn't a historical scholar in any way. How was I to know, But one thing that kept happening during my conspiracy research is I kept bumping into this inevitable fact that whatever's going on with this control system, it has something to do with Christ. Like I just couldn't avoid it. There's a whole New Age faction of conspiracy theory, and they're very much in the archonic route. There's archons everywhere, kind of controlling everything, and there's energy vampires and spirit guides, and there's a galactic federation, all these crazy ways of like explaining the truth. And Nibiru is going to return and mine the planet for gold if you want to go down this Zachariah Sitchin route, And then you had like the baseline anarchist conspiracy theorists who were kind of like, it's all about the 1%, the corrupt government, and all this type of stuff. But I kept hitting the Christian angle to explain it all, and it kept making more sense the more I would listen to these people. And Derek Prince was kind of like an early preacher for me. I used to listen to a lot, and something about it kept speaking to me. Just hearing about the gospel, hearing about spiritual warfare, and then at the same time having this sideline knowledge and experience into the psychedelic realm. Because after this salvia experience, I went pretty hard into doing more and more things, getting dimethyltryptamine, for example, and smoking cannabis every day. I did too much, but I saw some stuff which was undeniable. So it's kind of like, so I know spiritualist concepts are real. There's something going on I can't explain. What is it? And the Bible just had all the answers. And it took me having a spiritual experience in 2014, just towards the end of my degree. I kind of was burnt out. I had no answers from any of these philosophies I was researching. I had been doing these drugs continuously and was finding no spiritual enlightenment in them. Sure, I gained a bit of insight and knowledge. I saw some stuff, but it wasn't answering the question of my soul and where did I come from exactly. I had too many worldviews and ideas in this new age perspective to give me the answers, and none of them squared with each other. They were all nonsense. They all had a different answer. None of it made any sense. The only thing that had any consistency was the Christian perspective. And I kind of, in a moment of weakness at the end of all of this, kind of synapse soul burnout, just no direction in life. I just broke down, and I just said to God, help me. If you're real, show me what I need to do. What's going on? What is it? What's happening? What is all this about? What is this conspiracy? What is going on in the world? Just show me, please. And he did. And that day has been a life-changing day. I think it would have been March 2014. I'm not sure on the specific day. I've been trying to figure it out because it was the time when I went on my brother-in-law's stag do, what would you call that? A bachelor's party? Is it in America? It's the same thing. Yeah, so I'll have to find the date exactly. Yeah. But I've managed to narrow it down. I think it was roughly in March 2014. And inadvertently, this is another tidbit to the whole story, and make of it what you will. Even I don't fully know what to make of it. But I was in a hotel room because I was in a separate city for this party, And in the hotel room, they had a bath, and I've not had a bath in years by this point. I'd only ever lived anywhere that had a shower cubicle, so I've not like bathed myself since maybe I was like 10 years old or something like that. It's been a long time. So I thought, I'm taking the chance to have a bath while I'm here. And funnily enough, I had just had this moment where I broke down and asked God for help, and then I got into the bath. And I think I inadvertently baptized myself or something, because I had to shoot up out of that thing as soon as I got under the water, because I just had this feeling in me. I thought I was having a panic attack, but it wasn't negative necessarily. I don't know what it was, but I got up out of the bath and I looked in the mirror. I was like, what was that? I don't know what that was, but I didn't think much of it, and it's got on in my life. But since that day, I didn't want to smoke anymore. I didn't want to drink anymore. The things I was chasing after just were no longer appealing anymore. When I did do these things, I felt conviction I've never felt before. I felt this guilt hit me, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? This is not what you should be doing, And that had never been there before. I was pretty much the hedonistic, do what thou wilt type person, you know what I mean? And to have this suddenly on me changed my life. And I've quit cannabis, haven't touched the stuff since 2016. I had to detox off of that and get off it cold turkey. I don't smoke nicotine anymore. I haven't touched a psychedelic since that day, and everything's different, And now I'm married with the second kid on the way, and it's just I'm a completely different human being. And if you want to describe a born again experience, like I could personally attest, it's real. It actually happens, and I wouldn't have been the person to say that, 5 years prior to this, to that event. I wouldn't have been there. But here I am saying it now, and I can't prove that to people, but I can't deny it for myself. So from that day, with this YouTube channel, I kind of dedicated it to understanding the conspiracy thoroughly from a Christian biblical perspective. So I ended up going down these routes, like I suppose you could call them contrarian Christians. They're not quite mainstream churchianity stuff you'd hear behind the pulpit teachings, but they were the obscure teachings and people going into the extra biblical texts, for example, like the Book of Enoch, things like this, and trying to get this understanding of an antediluvian age. What happened in the past? What is the fall exactly? What are the Nephilim? What are the giants that we find evidence for in the conspiracy world, for example, and these remains, and what is our true history, And I just seeped myself in it for the years after that. And I'd always kept hearing a lot of people talk about the Nephilim and demons. And it was only after I was saved in 2014 did I actually even encounter any demons. Prior to that, it was all quiet on the demon front. I never got any spiritual attacks or anything of the sorts. Even when I was exploring these psychedelic realms, no entities came to me. But I'm reading these trip reports online about people doing dimethyltryptamine and seeing jesters, and having clowns come to them in the spirit realm, and clockwork machine elves, as Terence McKenna, one of the most famous psychonauts, used to describe, all these. But me, I got nothing, But once I quit everything and gave myself to Christ, I was having sleep paralysis attacks where demons were like pinning me down and trying to suck the life out of me. I collapsed in my living room. I went paralyzed for no reason, and then darkness seeped in from the corner of my vision. The room started to decay, and I felt like my own soul was being ripped from my body. And I had to say, Jesus, help me, to make it stop. And it stopped instantly, you know. But things like this just kept happening to me out of nowhere. I had a flashback moment 2 years after quitting anything like that, you know. And I'm back in the DMT realm, and I haven't touched the stuff in years, you know, or anything. But this time I'm looking up at one of these jesters that people were talking about when they're tripping on DMT. And it's like, oh, so first of all, it's like, I know where I am. I've been here before, you know. So I was like, I'm in the DMT realm. But this time I'm confronted by a giant looking up at this thing, and it looks like a black and white skinned serpentine, monstrous, wide grinning, purple-lipped jester thing. I don't know what to... It was hideous. It was terrifying.
So it was not very handsome then.
No, it was like, but I didn't know what to do with that at the time.
Yeah.
You know,
understandably, nobody prepares you for that.
Yeah, it's like, and then you're back, and then I was back. You know, just as quick as I was there, I was back in the real world again. And I think it was at my desk in work. I don't know where I was, but I was somewhere so innocuous. When I came back, I'm like, I've got to just act normal and carry on like that didn't happen. It was one of those type of events, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, just let's just forget that for a second, you know. But that never left me, that experience. Seeing that was probably one of the first things that kind of led me to understanding this book that we're going to talk about today. And that was maybe 2015, something like that, roughly. I'd had this dream where I was being chased by a character called the Hat Man. A shadow entity, quite famous in the shadow.
Yeah, he gets around. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can watch the video. I published it in 2014. It's 15, I think. It's on the channel. And it's called A Hat Man, A Demonic Experience. And I basically recounted the entire dream with visuals so people could see what I was actually dealing with. And I drank tea with dead relatives, and then he turned up. He gave me a phone call first, warning me he was coming for me, saying I owed him something, and he hadn't forgotten the deal we'd made. It was really odd. And then he comes to me and chases me, and I can't move naturally because it's like the air turns to molasses when you try and run in a dream. You know, it's impossible to go anywhere. And he was coming to kill me. I can describe it. I had to wrench myself awake from that dream. But he looked like a Morris dancer. He had this wide-brimmed purple hat, a huge purple overcoat, just multicolored ribbons flying off of him in all directions. He had a cane of all things. He looked like a pimp, a Morris dancer pimp hybrid, a very odd image. But after that, I went to look into it and discovered there's a whole community of people who have encountered this thing. I didn't know that prior to this experience, so that was like another shocking moment that made me realize, like, something's going on here. There's malicious, malevolent entities that are out to get us. It's like, I had no knowledge prior to this before being saved, you know, and it's like, here they are coming at me. And in hindsight, I can only interpret these constant barrage of attacks to giving myself to Christ in my infancy of being a Christian. Maybe that's where they came hard, because it's like, let's get him before he realizes his authority here. And I think the attitude from these demons was something like, if we can't have you, nobody can. I think that's what was going on in hindsight. I can only speculate, you know. But you have to understand, before I was saved, I was a promiscuous, drug-taking, hedonistic, narcissistic, out for oneself type of person, you know. I was a demon's dream. If a demon wants to inhabit someone's body and experience stuff, you know, I was giving it to them. Like, so I think they kept low in my life and didn't make themselves known because that was best for them to stay hidden, to keep the supply coming to them, you know. If they had revealed themselves to me when I was doing these things, I might have stopped, and that isn't good for them. But now that I had quit anyway, they all came out of the woodwork, you know. And I had work to do on myself in those 2 years, you know. I was really retrospective. I was reevaluating my entire personality in life, you know, the people I'd hurt. You know, I had a conscience finally, I would say. You know, I was actually like looking back and thinking, I've made mistakes here. I've hurt people, you know, and coming off the cannabis, you kind of remember things you kind of suppressed for all the years you've been doing those drugs, you know, and you start to have to confront your demons that you've kind of never had to deal with because you're constantly kicking that can down the road by self-medicating. So I was going through all of that. And again, I think that's my theory on it, but I knew I had to know more about spiritual warfare, so I really went heavy into the research on this. And I'm very much a have to get to the bottom of things type of guy. So I had to know, where do they come from? What are they? What are the motives exactly? And that's where you look into the Book of Enoch and you discover about the Nephilim. and the giants and the disembodied souls became demons. That's and I probably don't have to tell your audience this or you this. I'm summarizing a lot of work here, but that's the gist of it. And most people think demons are fallen angels, and they're two very different things. They're not the same thing. You know, I still have to correct people to this day who argue with me that I'm stupid because demons are just fallen angels. And it's like, that's not what biblical history tells you. They're a specific creature, like they're for a specific reason. And they have their own personalities, their own agendas, their own desires, and their own needs. And learning that, I kept seeing these images of depictions of the Nephilim. They were always shown as something like Conan the Barbarian, huge pectoral muscles, hench, loincloth, big brown dreadlock hair, you know, with a club or something like that. Rob Skiba was quite famous for showing them like that all the time, you know, scaled next to each other, next to a normal human. But I was never convinced by that model. I was like, from my understanding, what I've researched, these are the offspring of fiery flying seraphim angels, serpent beings, mixing with human women and the daughters of Cain. They wouldn't have looked human. They would have looked like something else, you know, and I kind of had that thought going on in the back of mind for a long time, you know, and then I had this DMT experience, and I understood about people going to the spirit realm, encounter jesters. You get clowns every time. It's quite a common thing, you know. It's like, why? If the earth has a spirit dimension, which is still the earth, it's just the other side of the coin. It's not a special place. A lot of New Agers equate a lot of weight to that realm like it's a better place to be. I don't. I think it's just the earth. It's no different than, you haven't left the earth when you go to these places. You're just seeing like the matrix code of the earth or the plumbing of the earth. It's like the behind the wall stuff you're not supposed to look at that makes the thing work, you know.
The under the earth bit, perhaps we get there's the heaven, the earth, the under the earth, and they're all part of the same thing. It's just there's like this above there's the above and the below. Yeah, and you can invert or reflect, and it's
like it's a mirror of our world. But I think the DMT realm is like, we live in a realm where we have bodies. Things here are embodied. We're in physical form. Where they are, it's a place of disembodied form. Things that aren't embodied. It flows more, shall we say? It's not as cut and dry or as solid as this world. But if you're a Nephilim spirit, and your nefesh never should have existed, it wasn't from the breath of God, you know, you're kind of stuck here. You're not going anywhere when you die. You're kind of still one with the earth, and you remain on earth, and that's kind of your eternity, you know. And I think when people did DMT, they were seeing jesters. Then the only entities they're going to be encountering here are the Nephilim. So there's something there about jesters and Nephilim. There's a connection there immediately. And then in 2016, we had the creepy clown sighting phenomena. It was like a mass hysteria event where people were running around dressed like clowns, just scaring the hell out of people. You know, standing menacingly on the edge of forests next to a park, looking at kids or something, you know, holding a balloon and just being creepy and standing in places at nighttime they shouldn't be, just freaking people out, you know. But it wasn't that got me. It was more that the media was covering it so extensively. It's like you can go to any small news station in any small town, and they were talking about this, and they had their own phenomena version of it. But not even that. Across the pond in the UK, we had the exact same thing going on. It was going on in Europe as well. Anywhere in the Anglosphere, people were doing this, and every news station was talking about it. And I was thinking to myself, like, nothing gets on television unless it's supposed to be there. It's all orchestrated. It's a script. It's a control mechanism. It's programming. So the clown or the creepy clown sightings means something to somebody in the initiated occult world. Like, there's a reason why they're showing us this. They're not just showing it for a bit of fun. It's too coordinated. It's like they're all doing it at once. Every news station, they want to make sure people see this. If not the people, at least the initiated or the members of these secret societies at least see this message. So I knew then the clown means something. It's a symbol. It's a representation of something else. I don't know what at that point, but I had all these things going on in my mind from just years of research, personal experiences, connections being made. And I just thought to myself, okay, so demon and clown then. Nephilim clowns. Let's have a look. You know, let's see what we can find about this. And I checked online, and I literally typed in Nephilim clown into YouTube, and it came up with one video. And Nephilim and clown was not in the title or the description. It was just about the Nephilim, a video about the Nephilim. So I clicked on it, and it was a joke video. It was somebody mocking Christian conspiracy theorists. They were like pretending to be one, talking about the Nephilim in like a History Channel style mockumentary, and they were mocking us. They were not on our side. They do not believe in the Nephilim who made this. They think it's stupid. They think it's ridiculous, and only crazy religious nuts believe this stuff. That's all so they were making a video taking the mick out of us. But he was saying, like, the Nephilim have white skin and red hair. There's only one explanation. They're interdimensional killer clowns from out of space, And it's kind of, he was having a laugh, but I was listening to that thinking, like, maybe he's onto something here without realizing it. I think there might be something here. So I just thought, on a hunch, I just kept rolling with it. And I started the series in 2016, just after the clown sightings in October. And I was just talking out loud about this idea. I think the clown represents Nephilim features. I think it's been purposely crafted to represent demons. But we're not supposed to know that. That was my first hunch, and I went out there to just see, is there anything else we can find on this? And the early episodes, for 2 years, I had a run where I made 17 episodes just expanding on this concept, and the connections just kept coming. It was getting a little bit ridiculous, to be honest. Even I didn't anticipate it to be so heavily entrenched in that hunch being true, but more evidence was coming to light. That I think I'm correct on this one.
Well, and I want to
go ahead.
Press on something there, which
sure.
I think is a really interesting, something that you're skating through that makes sense, that I think a lot of people haven't stopped to think about. Go. What you are asserting there is that there is imagery that is common, that is public and known and understood. Who doesn't know clowns? That is designed to evoke something very specific, but only for a very few. Meaning, yes, we're all supposed to know clowns, and it's we're supposed to be familiar with them, and we can even be uncomfortable with them. They can even be creepy to us. But the fact that they look like something in particular is only known to a handful. Meaning, yes, there's somebody there that knows that they know that they that certain other people know that the clown looks like a demonic entity or looks like a Nephilim, and probably even far more specific than that. And that's something so there's a blinding, or not a blinding, a binding of conspiracy there, where and you referenced this earlier with something being on television, like, everybody look at this. But 1% of you are going to understand what you're looking at, or, a fraction of 1% know why you're looking at this. And everybody else is just wondering what on earth is going on. And there's a recurring, element there of these big, obvious messages. There's this communication going on between somebody somewhere and somebody else somewhere else that is a public, obvious communication. But it's almost a hidden message that the vast majority of people who are watching it don't understand what's being said. Yeah. And the weird thing about starting to look into these things is the decoding of the messages is available. It just takes a lot of homework, because it's nothing new. There's the symbolism, the layers of meaning, they're out there. You just have to read a lot of old stuff that dead people wrote, because they wrote it down and they all agreed to certain levels of symbolism. And then you keep going back, and you mentioned earlier, you said, I'm somebody who likes to get to the bottom of things. And I was kind of chuckling, going, good luck. I thought I could get to the bottom of some things. And years later, I feel like I'm not even close to the bottom. I'm just a lot deeper, a lot deeper than I was. And one of the ones that I keep thinking of, for example, and I'm bringing this up because there are probably people in the audience who are saying, like, all right, you're getting a little out over your proverbial skis. I'm talking to you from Colorado. That's a Colorado reference, and people understand. You're going beyond what you can really justify. However, when you start looking for these things, you start to see there are public recurring symbols that mean nothing to the public, that mean everything to somebody somewhere, and they're so consistent that once you start seeing them, there's no way it's an accident. some of the, even down to the posing of celebrity photos and the elements that are included. I went on it. Dan's heard me go on a rant before of why do all the celebrities have a black eye at some point? You can find it. I don't know if you've gone down that route, but it's a fun one. But you ask people that and they're like, oh, that's stupid. That's not true. I'm like, but let me show you. And then you show them. And then you can walk away from that going, I don't know why this is there, but somebody knows why this is there, because it's way too consistent to not be something to somebody somewhere. Just nobody's told me what that is yet. That's what I want to highlight is the whole concept of the Nephilim looking like clowns. You're taking something that is arguably, 6,000+ years old and saying this happened and it was known to somebody somewhere. And there are entities that fully understand this. And then there is a human element that is aligned with those entities to the extent that they partially understand this. And there's an agenda that connects those human elements that are following this. And the public is 99.9% unaware, but we're all aware of the symbolism. We just don't know what it means.
Yeah. Well, I wrote it in the book. The first book is called The History. Because I lay out, historically speaking, where you get a clown from, the costume of a Western clown. And I also lay out the full history, the biblical history of the Nephilim. And I explain deeply how secret societies have always been involved with clowns and the creation of the costume of a clown. And there's a specific reason why they designed it the way they did. And most of my work, I would say, is an anthropological study of ancestor spirit worship cultures. So it's not just about the Western costume of a clown. So what you do, the clown in the West is a very specific invention from the 1800s, which we'll get into and I'll explain soon. But if you look outside of the Western culture and non-Christianized nations predominantly, they have what's called a folk tradition. It's usually the oldest tradition of that area. It's been going on unchanged orally for millennia. It is remained the same, and they keep it the same for honor, to honor their ancestors in a very specific way. But they're not talking about like grandma or granddad or the long lost parents or anything like that. They're talking about the builders of their civilization and ancient primordial gods. They're talking about the Nephilim. Yeah, and a lot of these cultures are just remnant continuations of cultures who used to worship the Nephilim as kings and gods when they were roaming around. And all you have to do is look at how they dress. And you'll find repeat patterns across all of these paganized Nephilim ancestor spirit worship cultures. They all dress like clowns. They literally white the skin up as much as they possibly can using whatever available resources they've got, be it chalk paint or literal grease paint. They put red polka dots on the nose and on the face and around the eyes and all over the body. They put on a big red headdress made of reeds or feathers or diamonds or fabric or whatever they've got available to them for their specific culture with their own specific style and aesthetic. They wear multicolored fractal patterned clothing, just like a clown. And a lot of them even use stilts, honestly, to represent the giant nature of these things. And you look at a lot of what these costumes are. They wear masks with big, wide, smiling grins and huge, bulge, glowing eyes. They are looking like clowns by a Western standard. And that's because the Western clown is modeled after them. It's the other way around. And these traveling secret societies knew this, and they basically borrowed features from each of these cultures to make their own version. And we call it a clown costume. And we think it's just a bit of fun for the kids. But that's that's the exoteric, basic public understanding they want you to have. Historically, dressing like a clown to every other culture out there that isn't Christianized is sacred business. So they're communicating and channeling their ancestors. They're channeling demons. So when we wear the costume of a clown, we're doing the same thing, whether we know it or not. It has a purpose. It's a tool. It's a very powerful spiritualistic, ritualistic tool. And the people in the know. We just don't, There's a further element to this, so that I want to get your thoughts on, because a clown is not. Sure. It's not just a clown. It's not just a look. There is a very distinctive look. So taking for granted that you're 100% correct on the visual aesthetic, there's also something more to a clown where it is fundamentally a mockery. There's there's a cynicism, there's an untrustworthiness, there's a level of victimization. Most of the clown
the best clown acts you've ever seen. Somebody's getting victimized somewhere, somehow, and it's funny, and they're being laughed at, and that's part of the joke. So there's this underlying level of mockery. There's a loss of human dignity. There's something that you can laugh at and say is funny, but there's this insidious undercurrent to it. Yeah. And do you believe that is also characteristic of the Nephilim, not aesthetic, but the Nephilim attitude?
I mean, primarily I focus on aesthetic. So I'm just solely going off the way things look, and you can see the parallels across cultures. And I think that's more important to keep the point focused that I do just focus on. But there is elements that the attitude that embodying a clown brings within the wearer of the costume is pretty much the same across cultures as well. You find these other cultures who dress this way. Like the Hayokas are a good example in America, of the Pueblo clowns and the Hopi Cachinas. They were black and white fractaled striped lines, big red lips, put silly antenna on, big red shoes, and they are sacred clowns. They're quite literally called sacred clowns. That's what Western anthropologists call them. And they play a very important role in society. They're supposed to behave in a way you're not supposed to behave and be the example of how not to behave. They're contrarians. They do everything backwards. They walk backwards. They just act like idiots, and everyone's supposed to laugh at them and say, "Don't be like the clown," But the role they play is not solely just actor and comedian. They're actually shamans. They are the intermediary between the spirit realm and the physical realm. So they don't even hide that. And there's a level of irreverence and behavior that comes with donning that costume, even in outside cultures, not just in the anglicized world and the Catholicized and Christianized parts of the world. And also, there's an interesting story that comes out of America, and the I think it was the Paiute Indians, or was it? No, it's the Duwamish tribes. They had to deal with pale-skinned, red-haired giants who were terrorizing their little village, by the Duwamish. I think it's by a river, the Duwamish River, I think is where it was. And these giants would come to this tribe, and they would kind of like play jokes on them. So the giants would like pick up the house and put it on top of a tree. And it's kind of like, what are you going to do? But to the giants, this is hilarious. And it's described that they had a sick sense of humor. They would always like laugh with this horrible laugh, like that would just pierce the ears. And they would tell sick, crude, disgusting, horrible, sexualized jokes about their giant phalluses, and these type of things. And it was kind of, the sense of humor was just horrible, really like sexually fueled, fiendish, horrible humor,
degrading.
Yeah, exactly. And they would just play pranks that would just denigrate the tiny humans around them, this neighboring tribe, the Duwamish people. Anyway, the chief of this tribe stood up to the they were called the Nung Nungs, that's what they called them. And they stood up to them, and because they kept stealing the women as well. Women would just disappear. Some of them would come back and they'd be changed. It's like they raped them or did something to them. You know what I mean? They wouldn't be the same anymore. And it's kind of, so the chief stood up to him and said, "You've got to stop doing this. Please leave us alone. Just please leave us alone. Like, we'll give you anything. This isn't fair, Anyway, they didn't like that. So the story goes that then the tribe of giants just decimated the whole area. They literally picked up some of the young braves, just popped the heads off. They were just throwing them up into the tree canopies and letting them slap on the floor and just explode on the ground, And they killed about 12 of the young men. They're kind of like, you insult us, we kill 12 of yours type of deal. I think that was kind of the thing. And it's the tribe never really recovered from that. And orally, that tradition still continues today. That story is still told. And it's kind of, what could you do to stand up against these things? But one distinct part of that story, not only another thing, they had a magic cream they could rub on themselves that made them invisible. That's another interesting part of the story, which made the pranks even worse because you couldn't see them. They had a sense of humor, an odd sense of humor. Like there was a jokerish element to them, which is interesting to say the least, coming from a Native American story, But yeah, I think there's something to be said for when you don the costume of a clown, or should I say a Nephilim, an irreverent spirit takes over you, an anti-god, anti-human, degrading type of energy overcomes you, and you naturally, that is the character of a clown, And some people say, well, I'm a good clown, but I think if you play with fire, you get burnt. I don't think having an ignorance of the spiritual law makes you immune to the spiritual laws. And I think when you dress like something and mirror something in the spirit realm, you willingly or unwillingly become a channel for that thing. And this is a practice well understood by every other culture. It's just in the West, we think dressing like something, like a demon, can be used in a way to scare away the spirits. And it's a very distinctly Western phenomena. There's a few odd places here and there that have this apotropaic worldview, it's called, where you think you can scare away the spirits by dressing like them. But really, that's quite a naive way of viewing it, because everywhere else doesn't think that. They think, I'm dressing like this because I want the demon in me. I
have a suspicion about that too. I don't think that's. I think that's an excuse that's been made along the way, because that really, it kind of goes back to. I would make a case that it goes back to Constantine and the integration of paganism with Christianity and maintaining some customs that far predated Christianity, and sort of flipping the narrative around and saying, oh, it's okay to do this because by dressing like a demon, we're actually being anti-demon. And I don't really buy it. And I don't think that it was ever intended to be. I think it was intended to deceive and to make something acceptable that otherwise would have been unacceptable, because it doesn't even make sense. And when you get all the way back to, I've had to run down the pathways of Halloween, for example, and when you get into why is Halloween the way that it is, what is validly pagan about Halloween versus what is just culturally weird about Halloween, because Christians can sometimes get very up in arms about, oh, well, is it okay to trick or treat? Is it okay to wear any costume? Can I trick or treat? Can I attend a fall festival? Where is the line between I'm accidentally worshiping a demon, which is its own conversation, and I'm actually I'm willfully participating in something horrific versus I'm just enjoying something cultural. And I believe that there can be a difference between those. However, what you're asserting is that there's almost a level of willful ignorance in the West, where we'll go to great lengths to say, no, I'm not actually doing the thing that I'm doing. I'm enjoying pretending like I'm doing the thing that I'm doing, but behind it is really a moral high ground. And you're saying that's an illusion. It's not really a moral high ground.
Yeah. I mean, look, they can't both be right. Either you're dressing like something channels the thing, or dressing like something scares it away. Can't do both. It's one or the other. Okay. It's a tautology here. Okay. And my evidence and research has shown me that 99% of every other culture, when they dress like something in their rituals, they do it with the intention of channeling it. They're not doing it to scare it away. It's only very few cultures have that belief that it actually, I don't know, keeps the demons away while we're doing the ritual so they don't mess it up or something. And that's kind of I've seen that a few times, from other paganized cultures, but predominantly in the West, it is what you say. It's we're dressing like this to get the evil spirits away for winter,
Yeah.
And it's naive at best, really.
Well, how foolish do we think these spirits really are anyway, that they can't recognize themselves, and when they do, they're terrified. But so exactly, if what you're asserting in the course of this conversation, I want to take it to the next conclusion here. What you're saying is there is an ability to channel an aesthetic, and it works, and that there is a portion of humanity that knows that this works. Yes. And that there is a very useful and much larger portion of humanity that is lied to and ignorant about how this works. So if that was the case, then what we should expect to see is the portion of humanity that understands that this works and is allied with this, creating scenarios where there's mass participation and mass channeling so that something can happen. And I'm guessing that as you started researching these things, you found stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Red Nose Day is a great example. It's cross-cultural. It's in Canada, I think it's in Australia, Britain, I think even America might have their own version of this. And basically they get everybody to participate in dressing like a clown once a year, like a massive, huge ritual for the kids. It's to raise money for dying children in Africa or something, whatever the excuse is, But what you're doing is you're getting people to take part in a massive vacation ritual by dressing like demons. But it's masked under this guise of charity. And this is where we can get into the secret society aspect. Why do Shriners, for example, which is supposedly a Middle Eastern themed sect of Freemasonry, why do they all dress like clowns? Why does every shrine sect have a clown sect within it? Why?
For the kids, Paul. It's for the kids. Kids love clowns.
It's for the dying children in the Shriner-run tax haven hospitals, you know what I mean? And it's kind of, what the hell does a dying child want to do with a clown? They don't really. And the studies have been done, and children don't like clowns. It's like 1 in 10, that likes a clown, and you have to question.
And the one that does really, really likes clowns, and that's weird.
Yeah, and they're the ones that'll be dressing like the Joker for no reason and posting themselves on TikTok. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of, kids don't like clowns, but when you understand that to dress like a clown is to dress like the Nephilim, and these secret societies, I believe, are just the physical foot soldiers for Satan's army, working with demons in the spiritual realm, who are the spiritual foot soldiers for Satan's army. And I think they communicate with each other and they channel one another to stay in touch. And I think it's a transactional thing. I mean, it's transactional everywhere you go. If you go to like some tribes in Africa or in India during their rituals, when they dress like this, the demon comes into the channeler, the one wearing the costume, and it asks the demon for things. The tribe comes up to the channeler and says, how do I solve this family quarrel? How do I make money? Can you give me the strength of 10 men so I can go and fight this war? Or can you make me impervious to knives so I can... There's reasons why people want to channel the ancestors. So they can get stuff, whether it be knowledge or power. There's a reason for it.
But so you're telling me then that there are these secret societies that are creating these events where you have people dressing like clowns and participating in clowns, and there would be all this deep symbology behind these mass events that are entertaining and for the children. And but the reality behind them is we should be able to find deeply seated, or maybe even superficially seated, secret society roots. And so tell me about circuses then.
Okay, well, so first of all, just to caveat the Shriner point, most American circuses today are all owned by the Shriners, still to this day. And then a step above shrining, you have the Royal Order of the Jesters, and you can only be a jester by invite only. So it's the highest pinnacle of Freemasonry. Why is that the highest?
So Shriners is a subset of Freemasonry. And
it's the highest order of Freemasonry.
So you have the Shriners being the higher order of Freemasonry, and if you achieve the apex of Shrinery, if that's a word, then you are a jester.
Well, if you get noticed, then you'll be invited to be a member of the Royal Order of the Jesters, and you can publicly. I can't get into the details because it's too graphic, but you can publicly go and find the FBI released files on the cases involving members of that order, and trafficking of people. Let's say,
but they own the circuses.
It gets dark. So most all jesters have been Shriners, let's put it that way. And not all Shriners have been Freemasons, but they tend to be Freemasons first before they become Shriners. It's kind of like a stepladder system of a pyramid, Yeah. But why is it that the pinnacle of Freemasonry, a Solomonic order, and then shrining, an Arabic order, is to be a jester? It's such an odd thing until you start contextualizing it into this research I've done here, and it starts to make a lot more sense. But let's go into the invention of circuses. So, first of all, it's best to do the history and evolution of a clown to get to the circus. They're kind of all interlinked together to get the symbology of the whole process. So first of all, like I said, a clown, as we know it visually, white skin, coloured, patterned polka dots, big red wig, big red nose. It's very distinctly an 1800 invention. And I mean that. 1799, 1800 was when it was invented, that year period. Okay. And it was popularized by an actor called Joseph Grimaldi. And he's been equated throughout all the history books as the man who invented clowns. He is the father of modern clowns, is what they say. All modern costumes after that date are based off of his original design. He's the guy who did it. He's not the guy who did it. I looked into it. He did not come up with that costume. He has nothing. He just wore the costume. He was just a useful, popular actor that people liked who was dressed that way by the son of a Freemason called Charles Dibdin, who was just given leadership over Sadler's Wells Theatre, where this actor was working. True nepotistic fashion, because his father, who also had the name Charles Dibdin, it's very convoluted and complicated, because in the 1800s, they just loved to name the children after themselves over and over and over again. But anyway, his father was a member of the Leicestershire Lodge of Freemasonry, and he was a very powerful, famous man. He wrote a lot of music and plays. Wartime maritime sailor music that was sung by the soldiers out at sea, colonizing everywhere, Charles Dibdin was equated and he was considered like a huge asset to Britain at the time because his music was keeping the morale of the soldiers up out at sea. He was a powerful man, and his son was given leadership over this theatre, one of the biggest theatres in London today. And when he took over, he dressed the clown in this brand new costume. And now you have to understand, the clown character had worn the same costume for about 1,000 years. It evolved a little bit, but clown is basically based off the Italian Pedrolino. In France, they call it Puero. And Puero was closer to the original clown, Pedrolino, the Italian version, who just wore plain white servant rags. No colour at all, just white rags. That's where clown comes from. And he's supposed to be the servant of the rich man, because there's this little show called a pantomime, which has evolved through the Middle Ages, through the Commedia dell'arte movement after the collapse of Rome. So when Rome collapsed, actors were like prostitutes. It's wrong to pretend to be something you're not when Catholicism started to take over. So these out-of-work actors traveled Europe putting on improvised shows. They were like the first traveling circus, and they went to a town, went to the square, set up a quick stage and did these improv shows of comedy with these characters, these stock characters, which anyone could recognize no matter where you're from. A rich man, a soldier, the drunk, the whatever. Just name a typical archetypical figure you'd find in any city, anywhere. They had a character for it. And the servant was the clown. And then coming out of the Dark Ages, as they call them, as this, for 1,000 years, this tradition developed, it ended up landing in theatres, which is why France had their own version, where you get Puero the clown from. And then you had Britain had their own version, where you get the word clown was invented. It's basically a colloquial term for clodhopper or fool. That's all it really comes from. It's a British term. But it's based off of these older traditions coming out of Italy and Rome. But then you find a new character kind of got introduced. Really odd. It's called Harlequin. And he was only introduced in the 1600s. And you'll find, if you look into where he came from, it's explained quite clearly. He was meant to represent a demon called the Wild Man of Europe. Now, like I said, these characters traditionally are stock characters anyone could recognize in Europe, predominantly, where this was happening. Well, it turns out the Wild Man is a folk tradition of every single European country. Even up to Russia, it's everywhere, and even through the Baltic regions, through the Eastern European regions, all the way to the tip of Portugal. Doesn't matter where you go, they all have the same tradition, and it dates back to Dionysian, Thracian culture, Greek, Mediterranean cultures mixed in with Norse mythology cultures, kind of trickling together in the middle to create this odd band. But they're all dressing like giant, hairy, multicolored, sharp teeth, wide-grinning, bulging-eyed, club-wielding giants. So basically what they're describing there are the Nephilim, but the European flavour. And it would make sense that the European flavour in colder climates would be a bit hairier than other areas where it wasn't as cold, So think of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, same thing. You get the cold northern Canada regions have Sasquatch as a thing. Europe also had their own Sasquatch problem, but we called it the Wild Man. And so they invented this character called Harlequin, which is actually named after Harlequins, which is a French version of the Wild Man. You have this 10th century monk recounting his encounter with Harlequins, the wild horde leading giant club-wielding demon. He went through his village and destroyed the place with his band of merry little demons. But anyway, Harlequin was named after him, Harlequins, in Italian, Arlecchino. So it's all one thing. But yeah, but he was quintessentially like the first real clown-ish character in nature. Not in look, but in nature. And he was meant to be the demon. So he had multicolored diamond checkered pattern clothing. He had a club, a slapstick, we call it today. He had magical powers. He could slap the stage and make the scene change. He could do backflips and quick-footed, quick-witted. He was rude. He was crude, just like the Nung Nungs I mentioned. Very sexualized with his jokes, with his rod in his hand, poking up people's behind, stuff like that. But he was a hit. He was a sensation for the people watching the plays because they loved it because it was funny, and they all understood who it was. It's the demon, haha, it's so funny. It's the cheeky demon out there being the foil for the humans. It's the wild man. And he was modelled after wild man depictions, primarily from the cookery tradition of Bulgaria, where they were very multicoloured fractal diamond pattern clothing and to look like the wild man beast. But you'll find Harlequin's evolution from the 1600s to the 1800s kind of was quite dramatic. He stopped being, over that 200-year period, like the wild beast character, and he started to get a bit more refined, a bit more human. As his leotard got tighter, his attitude got a bit more uppity, a bit more eloquent. So he kind of became like a fancy dandy lad about town rather than the vicious, brutish demon he originally used to behave like. So by the 1800s, there's kind of a vacuum in the play. It's like no one's acting like a demon anymore. Who's going to take over? Because people need it. You need the demonic entity somewhere. And Clown took over. Because it turns out Harlequin and Pedrolino were both the servant of the rich man. And the humour always came from Harlequin would steal the daughter of the rich man, Columbine, and run away with her. And then Clown, or Pedrolino as he was known in Italy, would team up with the rich man and run after them. And that's the comedy. The comedy comes from that Looney Tunes chase scene to try and get the daughter back, That was the show for like 2 hours. Like they really milked it for as much as they could, jumping through windows, falling through trapdoors, all this type of stuff. But you'll find that Clown kind of took over as the demonic role as time went on. Clown got more demonic in nature and started acting like Harlequin originally acted like, who was modelled after the demons of Europe. So what happened is when Charles Dibdin turned up in the 1800s, he just introduced a new costume out of nowhere for no reason other than to maybe make his mark on the industry as a new burgeoning director or something like that. That's what other people have tried to explain it as. Charles Dibdin himself in his own memoirs just says, I decided to dress Joseph Grimaldi in a frilled dress, unlike anything that's ever been seen before. And even one of the commentators who was recounting his memoirs was like, it looks like some kind of demon from India. It's really odd. And it's never explained where his inspiration comes from. He never personally explains himself. I was inspired by X, Y, and Z for this costume change. But you can figure it out by simple deduction. So you look at the original costume and it shows Joseph Grimaldi wearing it. And it's a drawing, it's a sketch, because photographs weren't easy to come by in that time. And he's doing a handstand with his head turned up, kind of looking at the person.
There's always an upside down in there somewhere. Yeah.
He's in a very specific position, though.
Yeah.
Like a very specific position. And his costumes also very specific in design. And I, from my own research, had discovered and realized, because I've been doing my research looking at pagan cultures, I've seen that before. I've seen that costume. And it's an exact replica of the costumes worn by the demons of the Thailand temples representing the Rakshasas. And these demons are all over the temples with their arms in the same position. And they're wearing the same costume with the same polka dots, the same frills in the exact same areas. And it's like a war outfit, supposedly, that the Nephilim would wear.
Who was his patron? Was there money behind this? Was there a patron family or somebody behind this? Because somebody did that on purpose.
Well, this is it. I mean, Richard Hughes is the guy who owned the theatre.
Okay.
Richard Hughes was good friends with Charles Dibdin, who is, again, this prolific Freemason songwriter. Richard Hughes and Charles Dibdin actually teamed up together in the early days, and they made their own circus, and they called it the Royal Circus. It was across the road from the original amphitheater run by Philip Astley. Sorry, not Rick Astley, Philip Astley. No relation that I'm aware of to Rick Astley. But yeah, he basically, across the road, they teamed up and opened their own competing circus. But they were the first duo to ever use that phrase, circus, in England to describe what they were creating, which is basically horses running around in circles and men doing tricks on the back of them. That was the first circus. The clowns were kind of introduced into the circus as a bit of relief between scene changes. They kind of became unanimous with it. But the people who paid for all of this was Charles Dibdin and Richard Hughes. This duo of the industry, very powerful rich moguls of the time. And like I said, Charles Dibdin had hired his own son. It basically said to Richard, hire my son to run your theatre. That's what happened, and he did. So Charles Dibdin Jr. comes along and dresses Grimaldi in this brand new outfit. Well, it turns out Charles Dibdin Sr. loved India. He was obsessed with India. His brother, Thomas Dibdin, was out in India colonizing the place with the East India Company. He was always traveling back and forth to visit his brother. He knew India quite well. He was going to move there. In his own memoirs, he says, I decided not to leave and stay in England because of bad weather. Basically, he didn't want to set sail because it was really bad that day, and he decided to change his mind not to live in India permanently. But he was going to do that, so he knew it very well.
Dan goes back and forth to India a lot, so just saying, Dan. Well,
the colonization attempt's over now. It's a bit of a different reasoning, but I do believe he picked up from his journeys there, especially as a Freemason looking for occult knowledge. Traveling in the East, he knew intimately what their version of the demon looked like, what Nephilim looked like, and they were the Rakshasas. And the Rakshasas of India are quite literally described as giant, wide-grinning, bulging-eyed, man-eating monsters. It's quite simple, and they have these many mythologies surrounding about the Asuras and the Rakshasas and the dualities, and they have many mythologies surrounding it. But aesthetically speaking, they're identical to the Gorgons of Greece or the Rakshasas of all that area, going into Sri Lanka or even across down to Bali. They look just like the Wanjinis of Australia. They look like they're everywhere. They're all over the earth, okay? And it's kind of India just call theirs the Rakshasas and have their own culturally specific version mythologies behind it. And Joseph Grimaldi was quite literally dressed like a Rakshasa demon of India. That's where his costume was come from. That's what he was modelled after. So not only was Harlequin the first proto-clown modelled after European demons, which is called the Wilderman, but then later, Clown was dressed in the costume of a Indian demon called a Rakshasa. And they're talking about the same creatures. It's a Nephilim. It's a snake's a snake no matter where you go. And it's just a different breed of snake in India as opposed to the hairy kind that was in Europe. It doesn't matter. They're all they're all kin at the end of the day. They're all of a kind. And so if you look at it aesthetically, I've done it on my channel. It's very distinct. It's very obvious. When you put the pictures next to each other, they quite clearly modelled the first costume of a clown, which all future costumes were modelled after, by the way, after Indian demons. So whichever way you cut it, historically speaking, clowns have always been a representation of a demon. And in a literal sense, it's not even hidden. If you just go and look with your eyes and do a little bit of reading journals of very long dead people and memoirs, it's all kind of documented loosely. And I've compiled it all into this book, so you can go follow it for yourself.
So the Rakshasas of India, you have these it's costumes, and the costumes are very reminiscent of the clown aesthetic, but the costume is representing a non-human creature, where when you look at the art behind it, these are very non-human beings. They have heads that are shaped like jesters, and if a human wants to emulate that, then they wear a jester hat to make their head look like the jester. So there's this, you can draw this very clear line from this aesthetic that comes all the way through to say, oh, okay, that's where we got the hat with the tassels or this particular look and this particular face, this particular smile. It's not they're not emulating a humanoid demon that is wearing a certain outfit. They're wearing an outfit to make their body look like the body of something that's non-human.
Yeah, for the purposes of channeling them. That's why every other culture does it. So in India, they have something called the Theyyam. Now, the Theyyam is a very old tradition in India. They don't do it everywhere. It's only in a very specific region of India that they still do. It's a very underground, old cultural ritual. And they get one member of the tribe in the area to dress like the god, okay? And they very typically give themselves wide smiles, red polka dot skin, often orange colors everywhere as well, and adorned in like very colorful clothing. And they do loud ritualistic music, dances, jumping through fire, all sorts of things. And then the person gets possessed. That's the end goal of the ritual. And then the people come to the person who's possessed and give it stuff. And if the person, for example, is given a live chicken, he's expected to eat the live chicken, rip its head off with his own teeth, because it's not him anymore. It's the demon inside who wants the blood. Do you get what I mean? So he's assuaging the demon within him by giving him the offering of blood, because demons like things like that. That's the point, you know? So it's kind of, you give me something, I give you something. So while the demon's in you, using your senses, these people in these rituals will do stuff. They'll eat things, smoke things, drink things to please the demon within them, who's currently hijacked their senses and using their body, their fingers, their eyes, nose, ears, tongue, to sense things, to taste things, to smell things, to see things. So the vessel, the willing vessel, drinks the thing, sees the thing, does the thing, smells the thing, whatever it is. So the demon within him can feel it and get the pleasure. Then the demon's like, so what do you want? You know, and it's usually power, knowledge, information, something. It's a transactional deal, you know, and in these other countries, it's not hidden.
Right.
They know, everyone around knows what's happening. Like, the demon isn't even worried about being hidden. Like, it will talk to people through the channel, you know what I mean? And everyone's like, great, yeah, I want to talk to the demon. I want the information. But in the West, where we're a highly anglicized, Christianized, Catholicized region of the world, the demons can't do that. They can't make themselves known publicly or openly. They have to do it in a hidden manner, because as soon as somebody in the West catches on to a demon, literally manifesting in front of them through a person, we instinctually know, call on Jesus. It's kind of like, even if you're not a believer, that will make you one. And you know what to do. Cast it out in the name of Jesus. So the demon's not going to risk it. They're going to stay as hidden as they possibly can in the West. So how have they done it? Well, they've done it by inventing this thing we call a clown costume. So now the secret societies who venerate Nephilim and work with them can dress like clowns, like Nephilim, channel them publicly, and no one knows. It's hidden. It's an occult thing. It's to keep it under wraps. You know what I mean? And you'll find there is a concerted effort today to get more and more people, members of the public, dressing in that specific aesthetic. Clown fashion is very popular, especially in the last year.
We've got the entire, you're right on that. The clown fashion aesthetic is definitely having a moment on the runway. But then there's the recent push for the some of the movies in the DC universe and some of these. And I don't keep close tabs on these, but I know you've got Harlequin and some of the Joker movies that are having a big moment right now. When you watch those movies, are you picking up on certain things that are being pushed and presented to society? Because they've had a huge influence on the aesthetic of society. I mean, any college campus you go to, you're going to have a very distinctive clown look among a certain subset of the males there who are going to emulate these characters from Batman, basically.
Yeah, well, there has been a concerted push to popularize that specific aesthetic. And I mean, you could look at popular media like the Joker. There's always a new Joker every so often. There's always a new reboot of It. There always will be. You know, Pennywise the Clown will always be popularized. There'll always be a new serial killer clown movie coming out every year, because every year they want people dressing that way for Halloween to open more channels. It's quite simple, really. But you find it's deeper than that. People really identify with the Joker specifically in a very unhealthy way. It gets very weird.
It's very, very weird. Yeah. And even the movie is weird because it forces you into this compassionate place where it makes this anti-hero the hero in this strange backward. No healthy person is supposed to be wanting to be like this character, and yet the hordes of people walk out of the theater saying, "Oh, I'm going to be just like that."
the meme culture is a good way to get a finger on the pulse of the mindset of humanity at the time, especially in the West. And you'll find clown world was a very popular way of describing existence from 2016 onwards. And it's kind of, I think there's a reason behind that push to call it a clown world. You know, even just in 2023, fashion runways were literally pushing clown core aesthetics. Dressing like clowns, walking down the catwalks in high-end places in Paris and Milan and wherever, you know, and fashion designers designing these clothings, mimicking old Harlequin designs, clown circus designs. And then you'll find on TikTok trending in the same year was clown core fashion, which is a bunch of young people, mainly Gen Z and some younger millennials, you know, were kind of dressing like clowns as a legitimate fashion choice and going out in public on a day-to-day thing and saying, this is just the way I am. This is who I am a clown. You know, it's kind of identifying with it in a very visceral, personal level, not as some ironic joke, you know, and it's odd when that starts manifesting publicly, but when you look into my work and you see the history behind this, you realize they've been pushing this for a long time. They are externalizing the hierarchy of the clown, and they're getting the public to want to dress like clowns. They still don't know why they're doing it or what it really means, like I've tried to explain. But the more people they can get dressing this way, the more channels they're opening up into our society for the demons to get into people. It's very simple math, really, and a provable, workable method. So even in the music industry, you'll find there's so many artists who have the same aesthetic. The most famous example I can give, but there's thousands, but just for your audience, you'll all recognize David Bowie and his alternate ego, which is Ziggy Stardust. Which is a white-skinned, red-haired, psychedelic clothing wearing alien, you know, as they call it. But anyway, the point of doing
I've
that...
seen Puddle's Pity Party live in person, which is quite an experience. He is about 7 feet tall, and he has an amazing voice.
But that's a bit on the nose, that one, isn't it? You know, and I think the more subtle aesthetics, like just getting people to pale themselves up and red their hair up a bit more, you'll find like someone like David Bowie dies. He's idolized and basically given position of a god in death. He is a god now to people, you know. Yeah. And it's kind of why his music wasn't that great, just because he looked like a clown, you know. And that is actually what you realize the point is. Yes, he was put on a pedestal and put in front of people simply because of his aesthetic, nothing else. Because if he can get more people looking at that aesthetic and thinking, wow, he's famous. If I want to be famous and a famous musician, I should copy and emulate those who came before me and what they did. And dressing this way gets you famous. So more people start emulating these idols and dressing in their aesthetics. And then you get more people getting famous dressing that way, creating more idols which people emulate, and then that aesthetic gets more and more popular. And you'll find it used to be things like, you know, corpse makeup, where like Kiss, for example, white and black, you know, that type of thing. But it's getting more and more colorful as time goes on because of this industry run by Freemasons who see these young artists emulating their idols, dressing like clowns, you know, and the Freemasons will pick them, put them on the pedestal, put a spotlight on them, tell the whole world this artist is brilliant, they need to follow them. And that person thinks, oh, I must be so great, I got here because of my talent. Nope, it's just simply the way you dressed. And you were chosen by Freemasons to be there as an idol to make other people copy the way you dress. Because the more people who are into that specific aesthetic, the more channels you're opening up in our society. And you have to think, they show the future, for example, don't they, in Hunger Games? What does everyone in the capital dress like? Yeah. They look like clowns, Exactly. And they want our society to be the same. That's the base aesthetic. And, you know, it might be more subtle. Like, people aren't going around literally channeling demons knowingly, but you're letting demons into your vessel more readily, and they'll stay hidden as much as they can so they can use you for as long as they can. Because the name of the game for a demon is to have a body again. That's all it's ever really been about. And this is one way of doing it. It's just one method. And it's a powerful
We don't
method.
have to be knowing that you're hosting a demon for a demon to be enjoying that host. There's absolutely an ignorance. I mean, it's very commonly, I would say, by trickery and deceit and opening a door, getting a foothold, giving this much permission, that suddenly turns into, well, now you have a squatter, and how do you deal with that? But if what you're saying is correct, Paul, then we should be able to look back through entertainment. And I want to go back to that circus concept because it was one of the first original, very mass entertainment. There was nothing like that when the circus came. I mean, you go back to ancient Rome, but I'm talking just like Americana circus, Ringling Brothers, etc. To get an entire town of people together to watch the same show simultaneously when there was really no other entertainment. You create this common milieu. And if what you're saying is correct, then it means there's an aesthetic or it means that there's a united, quiet front behind how this is going to look and how it's going to go and how it's going to be organized and what's going to be pushed and what the costumes are and who wears what and what the colors are and what the shapes are and what the motifs are. Because circuses, whether it's Ringling Brothers or any of the others, they all look very, very, very similar. When you started studying this, are you finding that there's basically I'm overuse of the term, but a conspiracy behind making things look a certain way and perform a certain way and the costumes being a certain way?
Yeah, it's they're trying to recreate the grandness of Solomon's court. It's a Freemason ritual manifest into a public show. So if you go back into the early days of American circuses, you'll find a lot of British people coming over were trying to establish the theatre version. But it didn't work. They kept burning down, first of all, because, I don't know, the standards were terrible back then, and people kept leaving bankrupt. And no circus would ever get off the ground because the buildings they kept building kept burning down. But you'll find the model of staying stationary didn't work in America because they were such an expansionist area where people were moving west constantly. They had to adapt with the times, and you'll find it didn't really kick off much until maybe like the 1800s when in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, when rich businessmen started getting involved in America. And it's kind of they used the new railway systems to create a traveling circus instead with the big top tent. And that's where that kind of necessity came in. It's more practicality than anything because the audience moved. So they had to move with them, and it's a vast land. So it's kind of staying stationary is not a good business model. It's like, sure, you can get one town to come to the circus once, but why would they come again? So it was more lucrative for the circuses to travel from town to town, a lot like the original Commedia dell'arte movement used to do in Europe in the Middle Ages. It's a very similar model, but they utilized the railways, and you'll find that it never really kicked off as big until Phineas Taylor Barnum got involved, P.T. Barnum. Otherwise known as The Greatest Showman. That stupid film was made that has no bearing on the reality of the situation whatsoever, But that's where people know that name from. Now, Phineas Taylor Barnum was a charlatan, an absolute fiend with no moral scruples whatsoever, who would do anything he could to get money, basically. He has a lot of stories where he abused people for money. And I'm talking like he claimed to have the Abraham Lincoln's assistant or something like that. But it was this really old black woman who was ancient or something like that. She was really old, okay? And it wasn't her. And she couldn't move, she couldn't speak, she couldn't prove or say anything. And he kind of used her until she was dead as like an attraction to his... he had this, what would you call it? Like a museum of oddities and curiosities type place, He claimed to have a real mermaid and he advertised it everywhere and people from all over the world. Charles Dickens even traveled to see the damn thing. And it's kind of just to see this real mermaid. All it was a monkey's head sewn onto a fish body. It's kind of, but he would do stuff like that a lot. He would lie and embellish to bring people to his shows. And basically scam people out of money. He used to run lotteries in his old town before he got into the circus game. And he got into fights with the local parishes and the churches over gambling and all sorts of things. Everything he's ever done to make money was just through manipulating other people, basically. He even took on a obscure family member's child who was basically a stunted growth. He didn't grow any bigger than 3 foot tall or something like that. But he basically took him under his wing and trained him to sing and dance and used him as a sideshow attraction with his own traveling shows. And he was known as General Tom Thumb, which was named after a book of the time, which is about a little guy in a land full of giants. It's kind of funny, that's what they were basing him on. Anyway, it turns out this guy who played Tom Thumb also became a 33rd degree Freemason in his life. It's quite interesting. And it turns out Phineas Taylor Barnum was not only a member of the fraternity of Freemasonry, but he was an Odd Fellow, more specifically. And the Order of the Odd Fellows is a Freemason sect, which is very interesting. the members of the Oddfellows are all either kings and prime ministers or actors and musicians. It's one or the other. And it's such an odd mix of characters. Why is King George IV mixing around with a charlatan circus performer like Phineas Taylor Barnum? It's just an odd... You wouldn't put those two people together in the same society unless they're all actors and they're all performers in some way. Who knows? Maybe all the world leaders in the Senate who are members of these secret societies are all playing a role. Charlie Chaplin was a member of the Oddfellows as well. You look into the list of members, of very powerful, famous actors, comedians, musicians, and world leaders, like ridiculously powerful world leaders. It's unprecedented, in fact, the membership. But Phineas Taylor Barnum was a member, and when Phineas Taylor Barnum decided to get into the circus game, quite late in life, he was 60 years old, he joined up with Bailey, and Bailey had this massive menagerie of animals. P.T. Barnum had the freak show. So they got together and put on a combined circus. You bring the animals, I'll bring the freaks, from my museum, and we'll put on a great show, and it was quite successful. And they utilized the traveling circus big top method. But Phineas Taylor Barnum was a spectacle guy. He wanted it bigger. So he invented the 3-ring circus. Make it 3 rings instead. Make it bigger and louder and more brash. But people don't know this, but 3 rings all locked together is the logo of the Oddfellows. So he inserted the very symbol that represents his fraternity as the key staple for all circuses going on into the future, including his own. But it doesn't end there.
It's very Solomonic imagery as well.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets wild,
especially
with Solomon. Yeah, I mean the Freemasons are obsessed with Solomon, and and especially in that time, they were trying to build Solomon's temple everywhere. Like they were just building temples all over the place, trying to recreate Solomon's court.
They haven't given up.
No, they haven't. No, but but in this time where there was a lot of money around, everything was fresh before any economic collapse came about. This was happening a lot, and a lot of money was being spent by Freemasons on frivolous efforts and things. It was very odd, especially building these temples. But it seems like the circus was another attempt at rebuilding the temple in some way, because you'll find all the other circuses of the region at the time, much smaller, all got together to do one show. So 10 circuses were involved in this one show. I think it was around the 1880s or something like that. And you'll find all of them were Freemasons. All the people who owned all 10 of these these circuses were Freemasons. All the Ringling Brothers were Freemasons, including their father. It's all affiliated with the craft in some way. 10 combined circuses together as one. The amount... We're talking like thousands of members here coming together to put on a show. And they've recreated a show called King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. That was the show they were all going to work on. And it traveled all throughout America and even into Europe. It was huge. It was massive. And it involved all the animals and all the people dressed like King Solomon in his court, with the crowns and the beautiful garbs. But all the costumes were modeled after the exact same costumes worn in Freemasonic rituals in local lodges. All the costumes for that show were made by the same company, the Henderson Arms Company, who made all of the bibs, the medals, the robes for Freemason rituals. Okay, so it was the same clothing company who made the Freemason clothing, who made the clothing for this show. And again, it was all they were doing was just taking the small rituals they would do in lodges and putting it on a grand spectacle scale.
And they're putting mass consciousness energy into ritual. So people who are attending the circus, yes, they're being entertained, and yes, they're paying a fee for it, but they're participating, or at least they're witnessing a Freemasonry ritual. And it's one thing to say that, but with the level of connection that you've just drawn there is undeniable.
It doesn't end there. I'm sorry. It gets even more obvious.
I'll put on my helmet.
First of all, the artwork created by it was by Barossi Calalfi, a very famous Freemason from London who made the artwork for the posters. And then if you look into breaking down a typical circus performance, you have the ringleader in the middle, okay? And he wears a black top hat. They say his clothes are modeled after the riding crop of the early circus performers who used to do horse tricks around the ring I mentioned earlier. I'm not really buying it. I think the cane is a reference to Cain, and you also have the top hat, which is a reference to the crown of Solomon. And I don't say that frivolously. I say that because in Freemason lodges, the only person allowed to wear a hat of any kind, traditionally a black top hat, is the worshipful Grand Master of the lodge, the leader. Because they say this on their website. You can go and have a look, any Freemason website. A hat in a Freemason court represents the crown of Solomon. That's what they'll tell you. So the black top hat wearing ringleader of a circus is Solomon. It is King Solomon. That's who it's supposed to be, the leader of the ritual and of the court. Okay, he's the king. And what does King Solomon do? That old story from Jewish mysticism afterwards, where he talks about King Solomon was given a ring by the angel, and he can use that ring to control demons. This is the story, and he used the demons to build the temple, is what they say. Now, whether there's any validity to that or not, in reality, I think the people who do this believe it's got something to do with it. I think they hold on to those tales as an example of you working with demons to create something great. Now, in a circus, you have clowns, which are an analog for demons. So you have, King Solomon, the ring master, the Lord of the Ring, who uses the ring to orchestrate the demons to build his temple. The ringmaster is orchestrating the clowns to put on the ritual and the performance. It's just an analog for Solomonic Freemasonic ritual, just done with layers and masks of occult nuance and symbolism. It's the exact same thing. So there you go. That's what circus really is and always has been. And again, the public pay to get involved in the ritual, not even knowing what they're getting involved with, not even having a clue. But the initiated go and they're like, as if they've managed to put on this huge show. It's just like what we do in the lodges, but in a way I've never seen before. You know what I mean? It's that type of thing.
And would you contend then that today's entertainment, so I'm thinking like a concert, you go to some of these concerts, or well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I know that if you go to some of these concerts, there's a very distinctive aesthetic to the concerts that is deeply symbolic, and I suspect that in many cases the artist performing the concert hasn't sat down with a team to make all these decisions on, hey, we're going to have the all-seeing eye over here and the open mouth over here, and we're going to have the tongue over here. But there's this consistency across the look and feel of these concerts, especially with the very, very biggest artists. I talked to somebody recently who said, I've never walked out of a concert before until I went to see Beyonce because it was so heavy and so demonic, which is interesting because you don't think of Beyonce. You think, well, wouldn't you expect some heavy metal band to be? And they said, no. There was something going on here. So I'm trying to think of scenarios where you see these mass rituals recreated with a high level of symbolism. Do you believe that there's a mystery schools are still behind the same thing, are still controlling the entertainment?
Yeah, well, circuses are old hat now. No one goes to the circus anymore. Right. Like I said, in the past, it was the only thing you could do. Yeah, like then the whole city got involved in the past. Right. But since the advent of radio, television, modern media, music, concerts, everything else, there's plenty of other things people can get their entertainment from now. So they've had to adapt. But they've certainly carried the symbolism across from the circus into the modern mainstream media because they still own all the industries. And so yeah, you'll find now it's the concert or the TV show or the movie or something instead where they've injected this Solomonic, clown, demonic symbolism everywhere. Some of it's more obvious than others, but like I said, in the music industry, you'll find the people who are the artists are channeling demons, whether it be for talent or power or to be an idol for other people to emulate. That's certainly always there. But then the music video is often embedded with this kind of stuff as well. It's everywhere. I explained about the whole, obviously, repetition of the Joker or It or something like that. They have to always keep the clown popularized in the minds of people, because when Halloween comes around and Samhain, when the spirit realm and the physical realm are at the closest point and the veil is at its thinnest, according to Celtic mythology, that's when you can channel spirits more readily. So if you can get more people dressing like clowns during that period of time, then great. You just strengthen those connections. But yeah, I think that the modern, I made a video, I think it's episode like 43, which is just strictly about just the last 10 years of media and where the clown has appeared. I didn't go that far back because I thought you don't need to go that far back. It's been prolific for 10 years alone. They are bombarding, especially the youth, with clown symbolism today. But how far back do you want to go? They've been doing this since the invention of circuses, before the television. But they've adapted. They've certainly adapted, I'd say.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I was at the grocery store today, and at the checkout line, there's an entertainment collector's edition that was all about the Joker, and flip through a little bit, and it's all about these different clowns. But I want to go back to something kind of early on that you mentioned.
Sure.
So the idea that Nephilim looked like clowns, and you mentioned, some depictions of Nephilim looking like just giant humans. Mm-hmm. Whereas the clowns look like something different and more reptilian. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's a huge range of, one thing we get to through the course of this podcast is, your mind expanded to realize that there's a lot more out there than we realize. So, even in the angelic realm, there's more variety than just a bunch of angelic robots that I think the average Christian kind of thinks of angels as. So do you think all Nephilim were of this reptilian clownish look, or do you think there could have been clown ones and human looking ones and different?
There are certainly examples of demigods that looked human. Hercules or Heracles is a good example in Greek mythology. Yeah, so I think there's a variety. I think there's a shape-shifting thing going on as well. I don't think these things were fully human in nature. If they're part angelic, I think they may have picked up some of their angelic parents' gifts and abilities. I think shape-shifting was also one of them. So I think in many ways they could look human if they wanted to, but they have like a true form as well. But not all angels are seraphim. Not all angels are fiery flying serpents. So yeah, there's going to be distinct differences. I think the majority of the angels who mated with human women were the seraphim, were the watchers, because I think they were the most trusted of God. They're the ones who sing around his throne singing, holy, holy, holy. They're the closest to God. They were his most trusted angels and confidants. So I think he's allowed to go to earth at their own request, to watch over the humans. And they some of them failed, and there's a story of Semyaza and Azazel, and there's arguments whether they're the same being or not, but they seem to make a pact and a deal to go against God's creation and do the thing they were going to do, which is take wives and mix themselves with them. So in the midst of rebellion of the angels, and I think there was many characters and people involved, and of the was it 200 watcher angels that actually went to Mount Hermon and actually mated with human women? I think the majority of them were dragons. I think they were the dragons of the past that were depicted all throughout human history and became the gods of many places, and dragon mythology is all over the place. I think they could have taken the form of dragons and looked very human if they wanted to. Angels aren't bound by our specific laws of physics, and I think the main form was a dragon. And if you look at most myths all around the earth, it involves dragons mating with the earth or women to create offspring. In Australia, they call it the rainbow serpent, who created the Wanginas. And the Wanginas quite literally look like clowns. I'm not even joking. They have white skin, big black eyes, and a huge red afro, wearing a polka dot white frilled costume. And these are ancient depictions of beings who are the children of the rainbow serpents, and then you have like the fire flying serpents of the feathered serpents of Americas. You've got the land of the dragon, which is China. You got the dragons in Thailand and in India as well, which, and again, the producers of these monstrous looking things. You've got in Greek mythology, you have Echidna, Echidna. Is Echidna, I think. She was basically the mother of all monsters, according to Greek mythology. Her husband was Typhon, the serpent sea god. He was like a serpentine human hybrid dragon snake thing. And he made multiple children with Echidna, who was a siren. It was a woman on top with two snake legs on the bottom. And it says in the book of Enoch, the women who mated with the angels became sirens. So I think Echidna, the mother of monsters, was a siren who used to be a woman, but was transformed in some way into this serpent hybrid. And again, her husband was a sea snake of some kind. And I think if you look at throughout all the myths, serpents are linked intimately with the creation of Nephilim and their stories. And Echidna created all sorts of monsters. She produced the Gorgons. And the Gorgons are basically human snake hybrids. They're insane looking things. The most common is Medusa, with the snakes for hair. But that's not actually how she was depicted in the original Greek. That's just like a modern interpretation of how she would have looked. Originally, she looked like a human, but bigger than average humans. They had a big head compared to normal humans with a huge wide grin and massive eyes. And she had red dreadlocks with white skin. That's nothing like the modern green snake-haired woman, you know. But the original reliefs and drawings of the Gorgons, which are the offspring of fallen angels, serpent typhons, mixing with siren women, create the Gorgons. You know, they are Nephilim. That's what Gorgons are by any stretch. They don't look human. They're like serpent-human hybrids. And the Rakshasas are serpent-human hybrids. The Rakshas of Sri Lanka, they literally look like serpent-human hybrids, the masks they wear. The Wanjinas are serpent-human hybrids. So I know there's many class of angel out there, and I'm not saying all of them necessarily who mated with the women were all seraphim, but the majority certainly were, and the ones we can remember and see clearly are there, you know. So again, but in the Greek mythology, you have Zeus. Like Zeus raped many women and many gods, many goddesses as well, and fathered many children. And he's not depicted as a serpent, he's depicted as a lightning god of some kind. But then you find that most Nephilim are related to lightning in most of these cultures. The sacred clowns I mentioned of the North Americas, the Heyokas. Well, the Heyoka is a costume, a person who dresses in a specific costume, which looks like a black and white fractaled corn snake of some kind. But they'll tell you, oh, I'm channeling the spirits of the thunder god called the Wakinyan. And the Wakinyan is depicted as this serpentine-looking, like eagle-clawed, horned hybrid chimera creature that flies through the sky on a monster horse of some kind, but brings the rain and the thunder. The Wanjinas, the offspring of the serpent gods, the rainbow serpent, they're the bringers of rain. They bring thunder and rain. So there seems to be some odd link between thunder, lightning, serpents, and the Nephilim. It's always connected. It's always mentioned in some way. And dragons are always the fathers. So I don't know. Maybe there were. I mean, you hear people talk about mantis beings or more insect hybrid type creatures, but you have to remember there wasn't only this going on in the antediluvian age. We know from the book of Jasher as another example, but it's mentioned that the mixing of kinds happened just before the flood. This is where humans corrupted themselves. You know, they didn't have to mate with a human, women have an offspring or anything. The humans decided, genetically engineer me, please. I want to become something else. Mix me with a fish, make me a mermaid. You know, mix me with a wolf, make me a werewolf. You know, make me a Mothman, or name your cryptid. I think that's where they all came from. I think that's where they were all created. Are they Nephilim? I don't think so. They're like faux Nephilim. They're petty Nephilim. They're humans who try to be like Nephilim to get an edge in a horrible world where death is around every corner and there are hybrid monsters all over the place that could kill you at any moment. Why wouldn't you take the choice to get the armor of a beetle, make your skin impenetrable, get an exoskeleton instead and mix with bugs or something? You know, it's kind of like, I think the angels that were left that didn't mate with human women, who weren't bound in chains, still in rebellion, helped humans do it to themselves instead of mixing with women again. But are they Nephilim? Not really. But when they die, do they become demons now? Have they forfeited their soul and their ability to go to Sheol and rest before judgment? There's questions here, but I think Nephilim specifically, the ones I'm talking about that had these wild features, I think they were the originals, the perfect half-angel, half-human hybrid. Not the offspring's offspring. So you find that the stories of the Nephilim, even they took wives and mated with women and created their own children. And then those children mixed with wives of human women and created their own children. So you're getting like smaller, more watered down versions with each passing generation where they're like a 16th angel rather than a half angel. And what would they have looked like? Perhaps less clownish, more human. And I think that's where you get the long cone-headed people coming from that have slightly wider eyes than a normal human and a slightly wider jaw perhaps, but still look relatively human. And I think it's a mixed bag. But the ones I'm talking about, the ones that look like clowns, these are the originals. The original half-breed hybrids. I think they're the ones. And yeah, predominantly from the serpentine fathers, did they get these features? Because if you break down a clown, all the features are reminiscent of serpent features. Even the frill around the neck, that's a distinctly reptilian feature. That's a frilled lizard of Australia is a good example of that. The wide grin is because serpents can dislocate their jaws to eat their prey. They have wider than natural maws. Just like a serpent from the front, when you look at it, it looks like it's smiling because of this. It's not, though. It's just the way its mouth is shaped. The slits down the eyes of a clown makeup, that's a predator symbol. Predators have slit pupils, and predominantly serpents have slit pupils as well. The multicolored clothing, that's serpent skin. It's very reminiscent of the very colorful variety of snakes and lizards and reptiles we have on the earth. They're a very colorful kind of creature, you know, and I think the costume represents that. Clowns on stilts because they were giants, big shoes because they were giants, little hats, little cups, little umbrellas because they were giants. It's all just a caricature. It's an amalgam symbol of caricatured features. The pale white skin, the base, I theorized they must have picked that up from the human side, because you find there's theories out there that the mark of Cain was leprous white skin. It wasn't like a literal mark, let's say, or something. It was this comes from the book of Lamech of Cain. Again, take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying it's cut and dry fact or biblical truth or canon necessarily, but historically it's giving you a glimpse into an interesting idea. Because if it was white skin, that would explain why the Nephilim had white skin, if they inherited it from something. And then this explains other features as well. The red nose. Now, the red nose, you think, this is odd, you know, what a strange feature for any creature to have. Well, it turns out, even we have this problem as humans. You can get something called a rhinophyma if you lack melanin, if you're very white. It's called the curse of the Celts, specifically for this reason. It's a very Northern European issue. But it can cause your nose to keep growing and become a huge red bulbous mass on the end of your face, look just like a typical clown nose. And if it's a distinctly white-skinned issue, then it would make sense that the Nephilim, who were the whitest, I'm talking like porcelain microphone white skin here as the mark of Cain, they probably developed this horrible feature as a result of this genetic corruption, you know? So maybe as the Nephilim got older, they literally developed giant red noses, just like humans still do today. It's a very real genetic condition, you know? And you can kind of start drawing these parallels, and they make sense to me, and I think they were done on purpose. It's like it's an amalgam. It's a caricature of many features just slapped together into a costume we call a clown. And you'll find, like, the Freemasons clearly borrowed features from all these other cultures. Just look at a Wangina of the Kimberley region of Australia. It's identical to a modern clown. Like, the big red wig afro look, they stole it from Australia. Like, specifically, they stole that image but the original, what Joseph Grimaldi was wearing, they just stole it from India. It's the same image, it's the same costume. It's just adapted in form throughout the years to be this odd image today, which is kind of like many features mashed together. So I think I've answered your question there about, you know, the serpent, the angels, and again, I'm not saying I have every answer here. A lot of my work is speculative, but I think it makes sense.
So there's an interesting theme through what you've told, even through your own story here, is that one of the things that you've been able to do so well, Paul, is put together things that are not necessarily systematic. And even in the story you told of how you found Christ, you didn't follow any systematic theology. You stumbled into an understanding of a relationship, and what you described as your decision to call out to God and hear His response. Like there was no manual for that. You didn't go through any class of that. And then your idea of your I love the story of your self baptism there on accident, that you accidentally participated in this act of spiritual war, and there was some level of spiritual response, and you're going, I don't know what just happened, but something just happened. And so there's this fundamental understanding you seem to have that what you do that has spiritual ripples, and that those can be just as real And then as you go out and you do your research, you're seeing that also happens here and there and over here, and that the spirit world is not a completely different realm, as you described, from the world that you and I are sitting in, using ones and zeros to talk to each other across an ocean right now. It's there's something still just as real and just as connected, and that somehow we're not able to. It's almost like we're unable to act without having some kind of ripple effect somewhere. And the permissions we give and the choices we make and what we choose to view and wear and look and speak and taste, it matters. And
exactly. Yeah.
And that's kind of the essence of spiritual warfare. Those willful choices we make are important. And
that's what I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to teach
right.
people. Fundamentally, I'm trying to reach people with the gospel in a relatable way. Because I understand, because I've been there. Like, some people need the clown to get them to God. They need this. This is the hook for them, especially these younger generations. The old methods aren't really working. And of course, you can always preach the gospel, and that's great. Absolutely necessary. But that alone sometimes just isn't enough to get those people are so heavily into the world, and seeped in what the world is offering them today. And I found through the clown, they have something that relates to them that they can go, that's interesting. And then I can then slip in the back door biblical history in a way they've never heard before, because they don't hear these things in churches. And that then, once they get that biblical history, they find they have context to understand why we need Christ. It's kind of, it always leads to that point in the end, just as all my conspiracy research always kept leading back to, this is about Jesus. We need to know Christ. We need him. We need to be saved, and he's the one to do it, and if you get that relationship with him, not only will the world become a better place, but your salvation is secure. And that's all anybody really needs, that security and the salvation in life after death. And it's real, it's tangible. And I don't believe there's a single person alive on this earth who has not in some way had an experience with demons. We all have spiritual experiences. Everyone. Doesn't matter who you are or what you say you believe. You have encountered demons at some point in your life. We all do. It's a problem. It's an issue. It's why we need a new heaven and earth. It's why you need a savior to begin with. It's why we need the authority in Christ to step on serpents. It's why we need these tools of warfare. And if I can convince people of that and tell them where to go for the answer, then great. And this seems to be what's doing it. And the weird thing is, I don't care about clowns. I'm not a guy I didn't grow up thinking I would be like some kind of quasi-expert in clown history. I had no idea that would be my calling in life. It's not what I don't care about them. They've never been like a second thought to me. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't dress like the Joker or watch the films. And I don't have memorabilia about anything like that. I read the book It when I was 13, maybe, because my mum had a copy, but even then I only got halfway through the bloody thing, because it's like that thick and the writing's that small. It's like, what? I don't care about clowns, but God has clearly used me in some way to convey this obvious information, which I've managed to glean. And I get messages from people telling me, this has brought them closer to God. It's really helped them contextualize things, because the clown is just a method to get to all the other stuff, the spiritual warfare aspect, what it means to wear something, how spiritual warfare can be as simple as be careful about what you wear, and to understand why it is important, and how there is a connection to the spirit realm and the physical realm, and why we shouldn't be interacting with these things anymore. I think there's a good reason why we don't perceive the spirit realm, because it's infested with these monsters that want to use you at every aspect they can and get you to worship them again. And then you get these idiots out there taking DMT, trying to communicate with spirit guides as they believe. And it's kind of, you have no idea what you're playing with. You have no idea about the history of what's there and why they're there, do you? Read this book and it'll tell you what you're dealing with and why they're there. And there's a chapter in this, I think it's chapter 18, and it's about the psychedelic experience. It's about my own personal psychedelic experience and coming to God. But the whole book really is a love letter to that entire community where I come from. It's me trying to explain to them, these things are not your friends, like as much as you like to think they are. They aren't some Jungian archetypical representation of the collective shadow psyche of humanity, as they like to believe. Like, it's not some imagination of collective consciousness or something like that. It's not a symbol that's helping you let go of your bad stuff so you can go on to be a better person.
Also, They lie to you as well. I mean, people go into this and they think they've discovered some big truth, and it never occurs to them that, the thing on the other side is no contract to tell you the truth, and it has a lot of incentive to lie and manipulate.
Well, they don't know that. They don't. They have no context to understand how that would even be possible. They think anything they interact with is just a reflection of their own consciousness. They think it's them talking to themselves. But this book makes it clear, no, there's a literal history here you need to know. That explains why they are there and what you're actually communicating with. And it's basically the answer is clear. Jesus Christ will save you from these things when things go south. And that's really fundamentally what I'm trying to tell them here, because they're not just going to stop doing these drugs and having these experiences just because I tell them. But if I can get them hooked with the clowns first and get them to read why these things are there, or at least get to the point where I'm explaining, if anything goes wrong, just call on Jesus. That's all I need to get to them for now. And then as soon as they do that and have that experience, they'll be saved. They'll know. They'll start them on the right journey and the right path to actually getting to know Christ and understanding the power in his name and the authority we have over these entities. If they're doing these things looking for knowledge and power, then they might learn a thing or two, might even get some power, and be able to quash their enemies in some way in a voodoo type manner, which Haitian cultures do, by the way, by channeling demons and the same thing, by dressing certain ways. It's all there. But maybe you'll get that witchcraft, me, I want authority or the others type of power. But if you're looking for true power, you'll realize it's all in Christ. He has all authority over everything in all of this in the end. And that's all my work really is. That's the point of it, and this society, I could throw all this away, as long as people get to Christ from what I'm trying to tell them here. That's all that matters to me, really.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing. I think for the first hour and 40 minutes of listening to this, people are probably like, that's fascinating, but what do I do with this? And I think you really brought it home there. What do we do with it is, understand and acknowledge that there is good and evil out there. There is a whole spiritual realm, and our thoughts, our actions, the things we do matter on a much bigger scale than our own lives, right? Like our obedience to Christ and our allegiance to Christ matters more than just, how it affects our current day, or even just the way it affects those around us. But that the whole thing is much bigger than we are, and much bigger than we're ever going to understand. So thanks again for joining us and sharing.
No problem. Anytime.
Well, and I echo that, as I do at the end of many of our discussions with our guests. And I say, thanks for doing the work that you're doing. It's deep work. It takes a lot of time. You're clearly gifted in it, and you're clearly being used by God to spread the gospel in a very unexpected way. But I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure our audience has, and we certainly look forward to keeping that up. And hopefully now that you're on the radars of our loyal audience, then they'll be able to find more of the material that you're doing. Take just a minute, let people know where to find you and what you have going on, what you're excited about, and what they should be looking out for.
Sure. Like I said, I'm on YouTube under Understanding Conspiracy. I have many playlists on there discussing many topics. I'm not just known as the clown guy, though that is my thing as well. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. So YouTube's the place to find me. You can find the book on Amazon. You can't miss it. Just type in The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. You will see it. You can get it paperback, hardback, or on digital. What you see here is a stack that I have for signed copies. I'm currently in the process of sending some of them out here and there. So if you want a signed copy, you can email me personally at understandingconspiracy@gmail.com, and I can get one of them out to you. But yeah, just come to YouTube, come check it out, join the community. I do have a Telegram group by the same name. It's got about 1,500 members now, which is quite good. And if you want to talk to me directly, I'm on there all the time, having a laugh with everybody and back and forth. There's many subtopics in there. There's a Bible study topic. There's the clown topic, and there's a gardening, a homeschool, a relationship section. There's a prayer section. It's all there. All the good stuff is there. And come down and check it out, if you haven't already.
We have a Telegram group for our podcast as well. And so I imagine some of those people will jump over and find you, because we send a lot of stuff back and forth on Telegram. So
good stuff.
Well, Paul, this has been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us and sticking with us for a couple of hours. I know that was a little bit past the limit of what you had in mind, but you've been a good sport, and we really appreciate the conversation. And listeners, thanks so much for joining us and learning about the history of clowns, a different perspective on the Nephilim, and hopefully some application in the culture that you see around you. As always, we've had a great time, and we look forward to the next episode.